Kara Shalom everyone, welcome to our watercolor journey. Come paint this beautiful cliffside with us. The materials used are listed in the description below. On the palette we have burnt umber, French ultramarine, Payne's grey blue and Quinacridone gold. The Canson rough paper is taped to the board and the board is flat on the table. Heinrich uses a Hwahong No. 1 Hake brush to wet the entire paper. For this one, you need to soak the paper. The extreme wetness of the paper helps to let the paint spread outward to create the misty look. This painting has several layers with some drying time in between. He starts off with a generous helping of burnt umber and the Sceptre Gold No. 8 round to establish the cliffside, working wet on wet. Keep watching for several valuable tips and techniques this time. Then, without cleaning the brush, he randomly picks up some paint from the palette and adds that to the cliffside. He spreads it gently, and notice how the French ultramarine and burnt umber fuse to create a greyish brown. Here he adds more burnt umber, keeping the pigment a tad stronger than the water consistency on the paper. If the pigment is a bit stronger, it won't spread as much and you can manipulate it a bit easier. To add a bit of light, he adds a drop of Quin gold, which creates a beautiful green when mixed with the French ultramarine and Payne's grey blue that is already on the paper. Your lighter colors will form the background and the darker colors will fuse to create the foreground for this painting. All through this painting, he does not clean the brush. Notice how the addition of the blues and the Quin gold create different greens, from a sunny light green to a moody dark green. Allow the paint on the right side of the cliff to spread naturally to create a soft, misty edge. The sky area should not detract from the focus on the cliff. He starts with a softer mix of French ultramarine and he starts from the right side of the paper to allow the pigment to lightly spread towards the cliff without really blending it into the cliffside. He tilts the board from side to side to help the paint spread. Mixing the paint on the paper gives you a slightly different hue than when you premix it in the palette. It creates a much more organic color scheme and it allows you to be more creative with your colors. The paint has settled a bit and the paper is damp on the cliffside, so now you can add a bit of normal table salt. Usually you would let the painting dry here, but he decided to extend the cliff a bit in order to ground the hill. So he continued working on the wet paper while waiting for the salt to do its magic. Salt works quite well with the French ultramarine because it is a highly granulating pigment. Make sure you wait with the salt until the paint has settled. If there is too much moisture still on the paper, the salt will simply dissolve and have no effect. The wetter your paper, the more the colors will fade when they are dry, so don't be afraid to add enough pigment to your initial layers here. Let the paper dry. Make sure to brush off all the salt residue before you continue. He filled the palette again with the same colors, but this time they are of a milky consistency. He's now working wet on dry, meaning the paper is dry and he adds the wet paint. He starts with the burnt umber again to add the next layer, and just like before, he doesn't clean the brush and he uses all the colors on the palette to develop the cliffside. He's careful to preserve the mistiness on the right side of the cliff, and the wet on dry technique here gives him some hard edges which pushes the mistiness more to the back and brings the cliffside more to the front. Use the salt effect to your advantage by painting into all the nooks and crannies to create shadows and light. Place a darker value next to the lighter area to develop dimension in your painting. Here Heinrich adds a bit of splattering on top of the existing paint. The droplets will fuse into the wet paint or lie dormant on the dry paint. In this way, he does not disturb the underlayer. He uses the spray bottle to activate the splattered drops to create a softer texture and softer edges. If you leave the splatters here, they will make hard lines, and for this painting, he wanted to maintain a soft, mystic look. He tilts the paper again to allow the paint to spread. He uses the brush very lightly to spread the paint and to help the watercolors to do their magic. The reason for this technique is to create texture and interest without overworking the paper. He adds a bit more color from the palette. He uses a tiny bit of water to enhance the mistiness at the bottom of the painting. He tilts the paper again to spread the moisture, and then he adds a next layer of salt into this damp area. Let the painting dry and then brush off the salt residue. Heinrich wants a specific green to add to the cliffside, so now he mixes the green in the palette. He uses Quin gold and Payne's grey blue to create a lovely dark green. He adds the green to the edge of the cliff and also along the lighter areas created by the salt to create depth and dimension. He keeps the brush strokes very light so as not to disturb the layers beneath, and he also uses the belly of the brush to make broader strokes for the grasses. Up to now, the painting is at the proverbial ugly stage. By adding details, the painting will come together nicely. He adds a few splatters again, and this time he will leave them to dry to create texture and the illusion of small rocks. He uses the Babra rigger to paint the lone tree. The tree is painted upright to counterbalance the diagonal line of the cliff. The tree is placed just off-center to create a focus point. This should not be placed in the middle of your painting, as you run the risk of splitting the painting in halves. The tree is painted with a mix of the blues and burnt umber. Pay attention to the structure of the tree and add as many branches as you feel necessary. The tree is darker and more detailed than the other plants because it is the focal point. Notice that Heinrich doesn't use a flat brown here to create the tree. All the foliage is created from the colors on the palette. He mixes those colors and he uses those colors to create the light and the dark in the trees and the foliage. He anchors the trees by adding a shadow to the base of each trunk. He uses the tip of the rigger and some of the green mixture on the palette to add foliage to the tree. For the shadow in the foliage, he adds a touch of the French Ultramarine from the palette. At the moment, the painting is fairly one-sided, so to balance out the composition, he adds a few birds to the right of the tree. They are nondescript and fairly light, as they only help to enhance the overall impression and to bring a bit of life to the painting. To bring back some light into the painting, he uses white gouache to counter the shadow side of the trees and bushes. Evaluate your painting and add some more detail if necessary. Don't overwork it though. Heinrich added a bit more texture underneath the tree to draw more attention to it. Please remember to like and subscribe. It would really help us a lot. We would also welcome your comments and will respond to each one as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching. Vaya con Dios.